Hi, boys and girls. I hope that you're having a good Monday so far. Again, I apologize for not being there, but I wanted to make sure that I left something for you that you guys could do and not miss a beat when I'm not there. So today we're going to continue our lesson from Friday. It's lesson 4.2, percents as decimals. So the first thing that you should do today is make sure that you have the date, which is December 9th. And it's lesson 4.2, percents as decimals. Make sure you have that written on your paper. If you need to pause the video, you can, and get that written so that you know where your notes are from today. So we started this lesson on Friday, and we talked about how we could change from a percent to a decimal and a decimal to percent. This video right here is on the beginning of the slideshow, and I'm going to post this slideshow on your Google Classroom as well. So if we finish today and you're still thinking, I'm not real sure what Mrs. Reigert's talking about, you can go back to this, click this video, and it will start for you. And maybe when the gentleman explains it to you more, it'll be a little more understandable for you. But we learned Friday that we could represent numbers as a fraction, as a decimal, and as a percent, and it all means the same thing. So we learned that this is a hundredths block right here, and this would be 23 of them shaded in. So this would be 23 hundredths of the block is shaded in, right? So that's also, we know that if we put 23 out of 100 as a fraction, that means 23%. And then Friday, we learned that if we want to change from a percent to a decimal, all we have to do is move the decimal 2 places to the left and take the percent sign away, and we would get 23 hundredths. One of the important things is notice that this is 23%. See the percent sign? This is 23 hundredths. See, there's no percent sign. So you have a percent and then a decimal, but you can't have the percent in both. It doesn't work out that way. Okay, so we practiced a little bit on Friday, if you remember, right? We did some of these problems together down here. We just moved the decimal 2 places to the left, and we got 0.24. So 24% is equal to 24 hundredths is how you would say that. 3%, when we move it twice, it would be worth 3 hundredths. 107%, we move the decimal 2 places to the left, we would get 1 and 7 hundredths. So we worked on that on Friday. We also learned that if we want to go from a decimal to a percent, we move the decimal to the right. So this 36 out of 100 are shaded, so that would be 36 hundredths. So if we want to find out what percent of this is shaded, we would say, okay, move it 2 places to the right, and we get 36%. Please understand, you can have a fraction, you can have a decimal, and you can have a percent, and they could all be equal. They can all mean the same thing. Here's an example for you. What if you had 1/4? That would be the same as, I'm hoping you're thinking to yourself right now, 25%, right? And what if you had 1/4 of a dollar? How much money would you have? You would have 25 cents. So 1/4, 25%, and 25 hundredths, or the lazy way, we say 0.25. These are all equivalent. These all mean the exact same thing. Okay, that's important that you understand that these are all parts of a whole, and they all mean the same thing. All right, so there's just 3 different ways to say the same thing. Okay, so this right here, decimal to percent, you want to write that on the top of your paper for today. So you remember, you've got D and P. Remember, these are in alphabetical order. We got a 2 in the middle because that's the number of decimal places we're going to move. So if we want to go from a decimal to a percent, we're going to go 2 places to the right. If we want to go from a percent to a decimal, we're going to go 2 places to the left. If you need another second to write that down, pause the video and write That way you'll have that on the top of your paper because you're going to need that today. Okay, so on Friday, we practiced some of these as well. We did, what if you wanted 47 hundredths and you wanted to write it as a percent? Well, the decimal's right there. So you just move it 2 places to the right, and that's 47%. Now, sometimes it's kind of tricky, like this one. If we had this decimal, 1 8/10, and we want to write that as a percent, well, my cheater up here says if I want to go from a decimal to a percent, I'm going to go to the right 2 places. Okay, so here's my decimal. I got to go 1, 2 places to the right. That's where my decimal is going to end up, but I got to make sure I add a 0 in there. So that would be 180%. You got to make sure that you move that decimal 2 places, and if you have an empty dip there, you need to fill it in with a 0. This is how we show our work when we do this. So you want to make sure you're showing those dips along the way as you're solving the problems. Okay, so that one works that way. And what about this one? 1.2. So that's 1 2/10. If we wanted to write that as a percent, we would write 1, 2. We get an empty dip there, so that would be 120%. Okay, so changing them, as long as the digits are there, it's easy. It's when you got to fill in with a 0 that it could get a little bit tricky, but not really. If you have an empty dip, put a 0 in it. If you look at these ones, so there's some models here. So these are hundredths models, right? So if you count these, oopsie daisy, if I push this too hard, it changes because it's a touch screen, it changes the picture. So I've got 10, 20, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, plus 7 more would be 44, plus 7 more would be 51. So this is 51 hundredths. So it says write the percent and the decimal shown below. So that one would be 0.51, which is 51 hundredths. And if I wanted to change that decimal to a percent, I'd go 2 places to the right, and I would get 51%. So I put an equal sign here because these are equal. And that just means that it's almost halfway shaded. It's just funky looking the way they shaded it. But there's actually 1 extra block shaded that needed to be for 50% because it's actually 51% shaded. Also, if you have something like this, and we want to write that as a decimal, we're going to change that one to a decimal. So if I'm going from a percent to a decimal, I got to go which way? To the left, 2 places, 1, 2, holy smokes. I got to add these 2 zeros in here. So then I would get 0.00034. Okay, so sometimes you're going to have to add a couple zeros, and that's okay. All right, what about this guy? This guy right here. He wanted to change this to a percent. So he's got his decimal there. He moved 2 places. How did he mess that up? He messed it up some way. How did he mess it up? Okay, hopefully you said instead of going to the right, because if you're going from a decimal to a percent, you should move to the right. He actually moved to the left 2 places. So instead of 0.0086%, it should actually be 86%. Okay, so on Friday we did this. We matched these all up with their partners here. So we have to make these all into percents. So this one, if we move 2 places to the right, we would get 42%. So that one's B. Oops, sorry. If we move this one 2 places to the right, we would get 402%. So that one would be D. If we move this one 2 places to the right, we would get 4.2%. So that's C. And this one, 4.02, that's A. Okay, now this one, look at this, fraction, percent, decimal. We looked at this in most of my classes on Friday, but like I said, with this example, you can write the same number 3 different ways. So this question is saying you earned a 92 out of 100 possible points on a math test. Which of the following is not a way of expressing 92 out of 100? So 92 out of 100. That's the question. So they have A, 23 out of 25, B, 92%, C, 17 out of 20, and D, 92 hundredths. All right, so we've got a fraction, we've got a percent, we've got another fraction, we've got a decimal. I prefer to look at these as all percents. That's the easiest way to compare these numbers because they're whole numbers usually, and you can easily put them in order if you needed to, or compare them pretty easily. So I would make these all the same. So if we wanted to make these all the same and make them percents, 92 over 100, that would be 92%. And 23 over 25, that one, I'm going to put it over 100, we would end up getting 92 out of 100, which is 92%. That one works, right? 92%, that one works. What about this one? If we put this over 100, what do we multiply by there? Times 5. So this times 5 is actually 85. So that would be 85%. Does that work? No. And then this one, decimal to percent, D2P. All right, decimal to percent, 1, 2 places. So that one would also be 92%. So the only one that doesn't work here is C. So what I'd like you to try is write this down in your notes. You don't have to write the whole question, just try to solve this. You are 90 out of a possible 100 points on a test. Write 90 out of 100 as a fraction, a decimal, and a percent. So take a moment right now, pause the video, and do that. So it's 90 out of 100, and we want to write it as a fraction, a decimal, and a percent. Well, it's already almost a percent, right? So let's take care of that. What percent would this be? 90%. 90%. So 90%. All right, that's easy enough. What if we want to write it as a decimal? We're going to go from decimal to percent. So we got to go that way, percent to decimal, 2 places. So that would be 9/10, right? And now listen to that. 9/10. How do we write that as a fraction? We write it like this, 9/10. And there's our fraction. Okay, so that's the 3 different ways that you can write that. I think that you guys are ready to move on to some bigger and better things here. So this is going to be some of your homework tonight. So we're going to skip that for now. And we're going to take a look at this. Okay, so it says solve each exercise, then rate your understanding of the success criteria in your journal. Well, we're just going to solve each exercise. It says write the amount of occupied space on the computer as a percent. So what does this mean? Well, this is the name of the hard drive in the computer, which would be C, the C drive. And it can hold 150 gigabytes. And you're actually filling up 132 gigabytes. So take a moment right now, pause the video, and write what you think the fraction would be if you filled up 132 out of 150 gigabytes. So hit pause, write what you think the fraction will be. So if you filled up 132 out of 150 gigabytes, it should look like that. That would be your fraction, but they want us to give them a percent here. So what can we do to this fraction? It looks like I have a 2 and a 0 on the end. So I'm going to take my calculator and I'm going to put it in my calculator. 132 over 150. And when I hit enter, oh look, I get to simplify. So I'm going to simplify that. Oh look, I can simplify it some more. And I end up with 22 over 25. Okay, so in simplest terms, that would be 22 over 25. And we want to get a percent here. So percent. What do we do to get from 25 to 100? I'm going to give you a moment. Go ahead and see if you can figure out what that percent would be. You're welcome to use the calculator. So if you multiply this by 4 to get 100, you have to multiply this by 4 to get 100. So that would be 88 per 100, or 88%. So that's where we're at, 88%. Our hard drive is almost full, but we still have some room left. Okay? All right. So this one says about 80% of the precipitation that enters Crater Lake Falls directly on the surface of the lake. Let me try that again. About 80% of the precipitation that enters Crater Lake Falls directly on the surface of the lake. So 80, where they live, Crater Lake Falls. I'm sorry, I'm all goofed up. Crater Lake, the precipitation, any of the rain that enters this place called Crater Lake falls directly on the surface of the lake. So write this as a percent